gotten some startling GDP numbers. A drop in the second quarter of more than 9% as the coronavirus pandemic continues to sow very difficult times, along with government policies related to that pandemic. Or perhaps I've reversed the order. We'll talk with our first guest about that. But the annualized rate, according to the Commerce Department, is 32.5% negative GDP growth. That means the economy slowed quite a bit in the second quarter of 2020. What are the implications of this? Plus, big tech yesterday. 4 CEOs, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Apple, Facebook, Google, we had 4 of them. I'm forgetting the other one right at this moment. But we had 4 big tech CEOs testify before Congress just yesterday. What are we to make of that in these antitrust hearings? Let's talk about it all with the editor of Real Clear Markets, a vice president at FreedomWorks, the author of numerous books, I think perhaps most famously Popular Economics. John Tamny rejoins us after quite a little bit of a hiatus from the program. John, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jimmy, thanks for having me on.
It's so good to have you on, my friend. And hey, by the way, I don't think you've seen the show open before. What'd you think of that?
I'm very impressed. Wow, you're multi-talented. And
You
so
know, harmonica's just something fun to do. And when it's pure fun, you just let it flow, let the passion flow.
That's right.
So John, 32.5% negative annualized growth from the second quarter, 9.5% negative growth for the second quarter. What are we to make of this? And should we even be looking at annualized growth? Should we even be looking at gross domestic product in the first place? Who's actually going to ask that question in this day and age, John?
Yeah, in a perfect world, we wouldn't even measure it. There's no reason to measure economic growth. But let's be clear that when you shut down a quarter of the U.S. economy, you're going to have, quote, lower GDP or just lower economic growth. GDP, as we've talked about for years, measures growth that already happened. GDP is a consumption figure. Well, how do we consume? We produce first. And so GDP, among other things, as we've discussed, measures government spending as a growth input. Well, governments can only spend insofar as the growth already occurred, as in they took in taxable revenue. And so with GDP, you're looking at a backwards number that measures what the growth that already happened. That it's down is probably a good sign. It means people are consuming less. And as we know, when they consume less, capital formation grows, savings grow. That's how businesses grow. It's through investment. Everyone wants to consume. That's easy. The challenge is getting people to save and invest, which creates the seed that farmers would use in old times to grow.
So if GDP in this case, in all cases, isn't a very reliable metric, but we know the economy is slower, is it worse than what GDP suggests because it includes government spending and considers that as an input that's helping to grow the economy and keep it afloat? Or is it better? Or is that an inappropriate question to ask?
Yeah, it's a good question to ask, but I don't think it's worse. I think the problem is once again with the measurement. Yes, there's no doubt that to add government spending to it involves double counting of the worst kind. The growth already occurred, hence governments can spend. So you could argue in GDP terms that it's worse, but so what? This is just a bankrupt number. It's something that measures just production, just for production's sake and consumption for consumption's sake. Based on that, you go back to the 1970s, the Soviet Union and China had pretty big economies. We know they didn't.
John Tamny, one more question related to the economic malaise, and then I want to jump into big tech. We have seen the stimulus package, so-called, the trillions of dollars spent to help keep the economy afloat, provide relief. Previously, now they're debating $1 trillion or more in some kind of relief and stimulus package. At the same time, we're seeing increasing restrictions in various states in the economy because we're seeing these flare-ups of the virus, and they feel that that's the way that we need to go. How do you assess those aspects of the economic malaise that we're facing right now, and whether or not government can be effective in helping to provide some support for people at this time?
I assess them as slowing the recovery. It's that simple. Governments can only spend insofar as economic growth produces the existing and future resources for them to spend. And so there's no such thing as government spending. What there is there's politicized allocation of private sector production. So rather than Jeff Bezos and Sundar Pichai and Mark Zuckerberg and those guys allocating resources, Fred Smith of FedEx, you have Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy. So as a rule, the government spending is going to slow economic growth. So I think it's very unfortunate. I think it's triply unfortunate that there was all this talk during the first round of spending that, oh my gosh, Shake Shack's going to get some money. Shame, shame. Harvard's going to get some money. If only that's all governments did. What people should have been offended by is that these guys wrecked the economy based on their own alarmism and then proceeded to extract $3 trillion more in order to politically allocate. The damage they've done is just staggering. Think how much more the economy would be growing if they were not if they'd not arrogated themselves the right to allocate capital.
However, one may respond saying the virus is flaring up. We've had about 150,000 Americans who have died of the virus. In certain parts of the country, hospitalizations are reaching maximum capacity for their wards that are devoted to COVID-19. And therefore, there are certain places where we need these kinds of restrictions, whether we like them or not. What say you to that?
Well, yes, but if it's really flaring up, if people are really just terrified about this virus, then what's the point of shutdowns? What's the point of restrictions? See, I don't need a law to avoid illness. I purposely avoid, before I go on vacation, anytime, any part of the year, I avoid doing things where I might be around germs just because I don't want to miss out on the vacation. I don't need a law to not do something that might kill me. And so let's not get into the numbers here. The numbers are ludicrous. The numbers support the idea that politicians have wholly overreacted. Start with liberty first. If it's assumed that this exists as a grave danger to us, then politicians are wholly superfluous. People will on their own adjust their lives, and they did that exactly before politicians decided to come in and wreck the economy. And so, no, there's no excuse for what's taken place. A disastrous loss of liberty. What I hope is that people have learned a lesson from it.
So yesterday, shifting gears here with you, John Tamny, our guest, VP at FreedomWorks, and of course, editor of Real Clear Markets. Yesterday, we had once again, this situation when you have CEOs come before Congress about big tech issues and antitrust. This was in a subcommittee, so a more narrowly tailored group of people. It was the first time, and this was the company that I was forgetting, Amazon. It was the first time that Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos had yet testified before the United States Congress. And I have to say, I think that he did a pretty darn good job for it being his very first time. And I want to put up pick one here because this is something that has been highlighted as the market share of these four companies and the amount of wealth that they've got. They're putting this out there, folks saying, oh, the USA's got $21.44 trillion, China $14.14 trillion, Japan $5.14 trillion in wealth and value in the economy, and Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook alone take up $4.8 trillion of wealth in the American economy. A staggering number, it would seem, and therefore it shows just how powerful those companies are and perhaps in need of antitrust policies put into effect against those companies and or additional regulation. What say you to that, John Tamny?
Oh dear, where do you begin? Well, the first thing is if they're worth that much, boy, they must have met some remarkably unmet needs from before. And all we need to know that is to imagine our lives without Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple. Life would be much, much, much more complicated and difficult. The next thing I'd say is that I'm proud to admit I bought shares of Amazon back in 1999. I never sold
Smart
the vast
move.
majority. Thank goodness. And my point there is that I was ridiculed for owning Amazon for many, many years. Why would you own such a company that will never make a profit, that is selling things online? People never see what Amazon was, that it was Amazon.org. It got to where it is today because Jeff Bezos thinks he has no power, because he is desperately fearful of losing the market share that he has. So he spends billions every year on losing ideas looking for ways to make people view Amazon as indispensable, given his view that he doesn't view it as indispensable. So he keeps spending to meet our needs. I'll add one other thing that I learned from you. If you go back to 2006, Google still had less page views or less visits than MySpace. The view that I learned from you from some tech reporter, I think in England, said that MySpace is so powerful that if we don't rein it in, it will eventually control much of the internet. How'd that work out? Let's go back to 2000. One more thing. What were the most powerful internet companies at the time? AOL and Yahoo. Where are they today? You rest assured that if you keep having me on for the next 10 or 15 years, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, a lot of these will not be nearly as powerful
Well,
as they are.
and I have a clip that gets to that point because I was thinking about exactly that. You think about Facebook now was established in 2004. MySpace was the king in 2006. You had articles saying there's no way, even 2008, articles saying there's no way that MySpace is going to be pushed aside. It has a monopoly. Well, in cut 3, Representative Jayapal grilled Mark Zuckerberg on Facebook's business model. And this is what happened, what he said in an exchange after she went through some of the ways in which Facebook went about purchasing Instagram and trying to increase its share of the market in certain areas and grow its business.
We're going to make sure that we build the best products in all of the spaces that we can around helping people stay connected with the people they care about.
I appreciate that, Mr. Zuckerberg. I think the question again here is, when the dominant platform threatens its potential rivals, that should not be a normal business practice. Facebook is a case study, in my opinion, in monopoly power because your company harvests and monetizes our data, and then your company uses that data to spy on competitors and to copy, acquire, and kill rivals. You've used Facebook's power to threaten smaller competitors and to ensure that you always get your way. These tactics reinforce Facebook's dominance, which you then use in increasingly destructive ways. So Facebook's very model makes it impossible for new companies to flourish separately, and that harms our democracy, it harms mom and pop businesses, and it harms consumers. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
How would you respond to Representative Jayapal there, John Tamny? Because that is apropos of your point about monopolies and MySpace and Facebook and Google and all these big tech companies today.
Yeah, well, again, I think you answered it years ago in the sense that at one point, MySpace, which was owned by News Corp, was viewed as the impregnable monopoly. How'd that work out? Then some kid in a dorm room knocks them out. I'll add that Mark Zuckerberg plainly doesn't think he has a monopoly. And the reason he doesn't, obvious evidence of it, is that he purchased Instagram. He recognizes that young people increasingly aren't using Facebook, that he's got to figure out other ways to meet the needs of people if he wants to have market share. But the fact that they've got lots of market share right now is evidence that they met a major unmet need in society. And in terms of trying to learn more about their users, yeah, guess what? If you get something that you love for free, they are going to try to learn something about you, but they're going to try to learn something about you precisely because they want to figure out a way to better present to you with ideas and products that may actually appeal to you. The tragedy was in the old Soviet Union when businesses didn't care to learn about their customers because they weren't interested in profits. There was no need to. Service was bad. Facebook is doing this because it wants to create a better user experience to keep its users around, not to do something bad to them.
You know, one thing that the Wall Street Journal has in an editorial out today is a couple of paragraphs at the very end that I think are very pointed in this discussion. They say, in a democracy, any accumulation of wealth and power will get political scrutiny, and the tech giants are taking their turn in the dock. There are genuine concerns about political bias, the harm to journalism and democracy by Google's use of content without compensation, and perhaps barriers to entry. And I will say I agree that there are some things that are worthy of being concerned. Whether or not the government should get involved is a different question. But the market, the article goes on, usually does the best job of countering monopolies. Too often, government intervention reinforces monopolies. Antitrust law, since the work of Robert Bork and Yale Brosen in the 1970s, has rightly focused not on size, but on consumer harm. The burden is on the critics of big tech to prove genuine damage and then propose solutions that don't do more harm than good. Now, I don't think that the these types of hearings should necessarily be held. I think we both agree on that point. But their point here is about damage, not the control of the market in this way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things to look at that I would respond here. For one, try to go get money from a venture capitalist and say, yeah, I think we can maybe get some market share. The whole point is to pursue monopoly. That's why you're in business. You're in business to meet a need in the marketplace that hasn't so far been met. So if it's assumed right now that they've got monopoly, wow, let's cheer them on for having achieved that. More broadly, where I'd like to go with this is I'm very disappointed that so many on our side, they're just so paranoid. It's the big tech, it's China, everything. Where were we before Facebook, Google, and let's throw in Apple, the meaning of the smartphone? Our side, the right, let's call it the right wing, used to always complain, well, we don't have any power in the media. The media are so biased. They get to control. They report what the left wants to see. Well, nowadays, because of Twitter, because of Facebook, because of Google, we can get access. We can project our ideas and get them to people in ways that before this we never could. Where's the defense of what these people are doing? And then if we dislike it, some conservatives feel that, well, they're not being fair to us. It's just not right and everything. So start up your own. Why are conservatives so in support of affirmative action as in be nicer to us, treat us better nowadays? Stop it. Get with the program.
I think it's one thing for consumers to express themselves, John Tamny, and say, hey, I don't think you're treating us the way that you should be as consumers. Could be for political reasons. But when you get the government involved and you're looking to the government to provide some sort of solutions to your complaints, that's a different story. I think that what we will see over time is the development of new companies that will challenge these other companies. We've talked about MySpace, but what about Sears? I mean, look at Sears. It was the Amazon of its time, and now it's basically going away.
Oh, absolutely. Sears was pushed away. Do you remember A&P supermarkets? They were the dominant power 50, 60, 100 years ago. They're gone. That's what we constantly see. Guaranteed, certainly in your lifetime and probably mine, Amazon will not be the dominant power. This is the norm. And so if people dislike Twitter and Amazon and Facebook, there's the market opportunity. What did Rupert Murdoch didn't get in the fetal position and complain the media aren't fair? He started Fox News. And so if people are bothered by it, I haven't used it yet. I've heard there's something called Parlay, which is
Parler. Yeah. Or is it pronounced parlay?
Parler that's some kind of replacement for Twitter. If conservatives feel that they're not being heard enough or they're being censored on these, that's an economic decision that Facebook and the others can make. And if they don't like it, there's the market opportunity.
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely right. And that is the beauty of a free market. Boy, we never have enough time to get through all the stuff we want to talk about. John Tamny, I guess we'll just have to have you back at some point to talk about the Federal Reserve and their role that people think is just so impactful during this challenging time. But we got to run. John Tamny, editor of Real Clear Markets, thanks so much for joining us today. And, of course, VP at FreedomWorks.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Great show. Congratulations on all you're doing.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. Once again, John Tamny joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Thanks for watching this clip from Jimmy at the Crossroads. You do not want to miss a minute of engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe today to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel, and you'll be sure to catch our live broadcast. I appreciate your support.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.